Hey everybody, Spacewizard here with part 3 of my Whispers of the Old Gods expansion review. If you'd like to watch part 2, there will be a link to it below in the video description, and I'll also be linking to it directly somewhere on the screen right about now. Heading right into it, Ravaging Ghoul is a warrior 3/3 for 3 with a battle cry that deals 1 damage to all other minions. So this is basically just a mini Dread Infernal, which makes it a pretty strong card in a vacuum. My guess would be this is going straight into Patron decks as an extra Whirlwind since we're losing Deathspite in Standard, and it's also possible we could even see it in other warrior decks as long as 1 health minions are abundant in the meta. Mire Keeper is a druid 3/3 for 4 with choose 1, summon a 2/2 slime, or gain an empty mana crystal. This is a pretty interesting 4-drop that opens up new ramp options for druid. A 3/3 and a 2/2 together is a pretty strong combination, although I think it'll end up being weaker than a Chillwind Yeti most of the time, because of how vulnerable the 2/2 is to trades. Of course, the main draw of this card is its optional mana crystal, which will be very powerful in slower matchups. You can also see this card being an excellent minion to innervate or coin out. Hammer of Twilight is a Shaman 4/2 weapon for 5 with a death rattle that summons a 4/2 elemental. The overall value on this card is really high, especially since you're more than likely going to be summoning the 4/2 on your next turn, as long as you attack on the turn you play this. The main 2 problems with this card are that paying 5 mana to deal 4 damage is pretty inefficient, which could very easily make this card too slow, and that you would really only play this card in a Shaman control deck, and right now I don't know how viable that's going to be. Something interesting to consider is that this card has some crazy good synergy with Charged Hammer, since playing the Twilight Hammer will destroy the Charged Hammer, which would effectively make it equivalent to Shadow Form for Shamans. Blood of the Ancient One is a 9/9 for 9, with if you control 2 of these at the end of your turn, merge them into the Ancient One, which is a 30/30. So this is obviously a card designed for pure fun, since it's way too hard to get the Ancient One out consistently. Maybe at some point in the future an OP combo will exist that guarantees you the Ancient One, but for right now this is just a cool card that you can mess around with in casual play. Blood Warriors is a 3-mana warrior spell that adds a copy of each damage-friendly minion to your hand. This seems like a pretty powerful combo card to me, even within the current set. On one hand, you can generate extra Grim Patrons to overwhelm your opponent provided you have enough Whirlwind effects, and on the other hand, you can generate ridiculous amounts of armor by copying Armor Smiths. To me, it seems almost too easy to get a defensive combo going with 3 or even 4 Armor Smiths at once using this card. This could very well end up hard countering burn decks. Call of the Wild is an 8-mana hunter spell that summons all 3 animal companions, Huffer, Leok, and Misha in that order. To me, this seems like the strongest 8-drop in the game. Not only can you run 2 copies of it, but it guarantees 5 instantaneous damage and a 5/4 taunt at the same time, making it both offensive and defensive. The only problem I see with it is that Midrange Hunter is pretty weak right now, and this is really the only strong hunter card that's been revealed so far, so it may not get a chance to shine if hunters don't get anything else strong revealed in the rest of the set. Yogg-Saron is a legendary 7/5 for 10 with a battle cry that casts a random spell for each spell you've cast this game. I did a whole analysis video on this specific card already that I'll be linking to in the description of this video and somewhere on the screen right now. If you'd rather not watch the video, I'm of the opinion that this card has potential to see play in spell-heavy control decks that want to grind out your opponent over the course of very many turns. Spreading Madness is a 3-mana warlock spell that deals 9 damage randomly split among all characters. This card seems way too random to be good at first glance, but I think there's actually some merit to it. If your side of the board is empty, or if you simply trade and destroy all of your own minions before casting this spell, the only friendly character that you'll be able to hurt is yourself. So if your opponent has at least 1 minion on the board, the odds will be in your favor. Essentially, as long as you don't have any minions, this is like a pseudo-Avenging Wrath, which could actually be pretty strong. It might end up being too specific a circumstance for this to be good, though. Cho'Gall is a legendary warlock 7/7 for 7 with a battle cry that makes your next spell that you cast this turn cost health instead of mana. This card's stats and effect are inherently strong and open up some pretty crazy tempo plays on turn 7. It's really just a matter of how many strong mid to high mana cost spells Blizzard wants to give Warlock. If we get a replacement for Implosion and Siphon Soul stays strong, then I can easily see this card fitting into any non-Zoo Warlock list. Possessed Villager is a Warlock 1/1 for 1 with a death rattle that summons a 1/1 Shadow Beast. The vast majority of the time, this card is going to be almost completely equivalent to an Argent Squire, so I don't expect that it's going to see much play. I think this card actually exists for the sole purpose of making Dark Peddler weaker. Class cards are 4 times as likely to be discovered, so if a Warlock class card is essentially just an Argent Squire, then Discover is weaker as a whole. Wisps of the Old Gods is a 7-mana druid spell that summons 7 1/1 wisps, or gives your minions +2/+2. Either way, this card is overcosted. Unless you play this on an empty board, you're not going to get full value out of the wisps that this card can summon, and if you choose to buff your minions, you're essentially just getting 2 Power of the Wilds, which means you're getting 4 mana worth of effects for 7 mana. Unless there's a card that is yet to be revealed that combos with this, there's no way this is going to get played. Soggoth the Slitherer is a legendary 5/9 for 9 with Taunt and can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. Assuming your opponent doesn't have an AoE that deals 9 damage, this card is pretty much guaranteed to trade with at least 2 of your opponent's minions, which makes it great in control decks. And since it has Taunt, it will pretty much shut down aggro decks, provided you can make it to turn 9. I can also see it getting played in Ramp Druid. The deciding factor here is going to be whether or not the metagame ends up being slow enough for decks to play a completely defensive 9-drop. Thistle Tea is a 6-mana rogue spell that draws a card and adds 2 copies of it to your hand. Since this card generates new cards for you instead of drawing them, I can see it being really strong in control decks. And since the cards it generates are copies, it has a lot of combo potential if you hit the right card at the right time. The only thing holding this card back is its mana cost to card ratio. 3 cards for 6 mana might not be enough when you can draw 4 cards for 7 mana with Sprint, but we'll have to wait and see how things play out. Twilight Summoner is a 1/1 for 4 with a death rattle that summons a 5/5. This card just seems a little too slow to me. 1 health gives your opponent a certain degree of control over when the 5/5 gets summoned since they can hero power ping it whenever they want. And historically, 4-drops with big stats like Hungry Dragon and Fireguard Destroyer haven't been the most powerful 4-drops in the meta, although that could just be because of Pilot Shredder overshadowing them. The thing that most hold this card back is that you have to wait a turn to summon the 5/5, which makes it incredibly weak against aggro decks, so I don't suspect that this is going to be a very popular 4-drop. Embrace the Shadow is a 2-mana priest spell that makes your healing effects deal damage instead this turn. There's obviously some big damage combo potential here with this card, but I think the biggest thing here is that this is essentially just a second Arakkoa for your Circle of Healing combos. Assuming you run this and Arakkoa in your deck, you can pretty much keep Circle of Healing 100% of the time in your opening hand versus aggro decks, which is huge. It also lets you play the combo at half cost, which opens up a lot of follow-up plays which weren't possible before. Just on account of its synergy with Circle of Healing, I fully expect that this card is going to get played. Deathwing Dragonlord is a legendary 12/12 for 10 with a death rattle that puts all dragons from your hand into the battlefield. This is the first real aggressive win condition in the game, as it's very unlikely your opponent is going to have something that can destroy Deathwing and then clear your entire board of dragons afterwards, which in theory will win you the game on the spot. On paper this sounds really good, but getting to turn 10 with a bunch of dragons left in your hand might not be feasible with the current iteration of dragon decks. I want to wait and see how many more dragons we get in the set before I call this card unviable, however. Faceless Summoner is a mage 5/5 for 6 with a battlecry that summons a random 3-cost minion. I've got statistics on the average value of 3-mana minions, and you've got a solid chance of getting something above average here, so I have high hopes for this card. It's sort of like a scaled up Silverhand Knight, and if I'm not mistaken, this is probably the best 6-drop you can play on curve in a mage deck. Servant of Yogg-Saron is a mage 5/4 for 5 with a battlecry that casts a random spell that costs 5 or less on a randomly chosen target. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that this card is unplayable. Your chances of getting something good are only in your favor if your board is empty when you play this, and that just doesn't seem very feasible to me. And if you by chance get something negative, you're gonna probably lose the game. Shadowcaster is a rogue 4/4 for 5 with a battlecry that adds a 1/1 copy of a friendly minion to your hand that costs 1. So I don't really understand how Blizzard could print this card. At some point in time, this is guaranteed to be broken. As long as this card exists, Blizzard pretty much can't print powerful effects on low mana cost minions, which severely limits design space. This card probably isn't OP right now, but I do expect that it will get played in some sort of a neat combo deck as long as there's enough solid targets for its effect. Forlorn Stalker is a hunter 4/2 for 3 with a battlecry that gives all the death rattle minions in your hand +1/+1. I think this card is awful. It's like a Shattered Sun Cleric with a worse stat line that doesn't buff cards on your board. You don't want to play this on curve, and your death rattle minions already have good stat lines if you're playing them in your deck, so there's really no reason to play this. Demented Frostcaller is a mage 2/4 for 4 with after you cast a spell, freeze a random enemy. This card has some potential if you cast a lot of low mana cost spells all at once, but otherwise it just seems way too random. Casting just one spell at a time with this card doesn't seem consistent or powerful enough to warrant playing it in your deck. Shifting Shade is a priest 4/3 for 4 with a death rattle that copies a card from your opponent's deck and adds it to your hand. I think this is a really strong card that won't see any play because priests don't need any more card advantage. If you're playing priest, you already have more cards than you know what to do with in any given matchup. You don't need an extra one from your opponent's deck to win. I think you'd much rather just play removal or something with better stats on turn 4. Twilight Flamecaller is a mage 2/2 for 3 with a battlecry that deals 1 damage to all enemy minions. Not much to say about this one. Good card. If 1 health minions are abundant in the meta, then this card will get played. Princess Huhuran is a legendary hunter 6/5 for 5 with a battlecry that triggers a friendly minion's death rattle. So while this is without a doubt an exceptional card, it's only exceptional if you have an exceptional death rattle to play it with. Savannah Highmane doesn't count because for this card to be good, you need to play it on curve. And a lot of good death rattles are leaving standard. So before I make any judgment calls here, I want to wait for the full set to get released. Dark Arakkoa is a druid 5/7 for 6 with taunt and a battlecry that gives your Cthulhu +3/+3. Another card that I don't have much to say about. It's a scaled up druid of the claw, so it's good. It's probably the best 6-drop you can play on curve in druid decks, actually. It's good even without the Cthulhu buff, so that just makes it a staple in druid Cthulhu decks. Shifter Zerus is a legendary 1/1 for 1 with each turn this is in your hand, transform it into a random minion. This effect triggers at the start of your turn and will trigger even after Zerus is transformed as long as he's in your hand. I think there's actually some merit to this card because you have the option of playing it as a 1/1 on turn 1 to contest the board, and every turn after that it will become something of a higher value than a regular 1-drop. Granted, a 1/1 is going to have trouble contesting the board, so in my mind it seems much more likely that the Blizzard just wanted to test a new mechanic to make sure it worked before they used it in future sets and tavern brawls. That's it for this week's video, guys, but don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I'll be back next week with another new video, but until then, you can check out Hearthhead.com or either of its social media pages for all sorts of Hearthstone-related content. See you next time, everybody.